My brother stood at the head of the Chicago boardroom table, moments away from selling our family's logistics empire to quietly bury the $15 million he had embezzled. He slid the final acquisition contract across the polished mahogany, smiling confidently at the same executives who had helped him exile me 5 years ago. What he didn't know, as the head of security locked the heavy glass doors from the inside, was that the anonymous private equity firm buying his shares was entirely controlled by me. The boardroom on the 42nd floor smelled exactly the way I remembered it, a suffocating mix of expensive dark roast coffee, leather upholstery, and the distinct metallic scent of corporate desperation masquerading as success. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Chicago skyline was wrapped in a dense gray morning fog, completely isolating the room from the rest of the world. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with a false sense of victory. Marcus adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Italian suit. He picked up a heavy gold Mont Blanc pen, twirling it casually between his fingers. To the rest of the business world, Marcus Sterling was a visionary CEO navigating a tough market. But looking at the balance sheets I had secretly acquired over the last 14 months, I knew the truth. He wasn't a visionary. He was a parasite. The company was bleeding out, starved of cash flow, because Marcus had been systematically siphoning funds into offshore accounts. This acquisition deal was his escape hatch. By selling the company at a massive discount to a faceless holding company, he was essentially burning down the house to hide the stolen furniture. The new owners would inherit the debt, the audits would be sealed in the transition, and Marcus would walk away millions of dollars richer, his reputation completely intact. Seated around the massive table were the 7 board members. I knew all of them. I knew their weaknesses, their blind spots, and exactly how much it cost for Marcus to buy their loyalty. Sitting directly to Marcus's right was David Vance, the chief legal counsel. David was the architect of my destruction 5 years ago. He was currently reviewing the final page of the contract, nodding in solemn approval, entirely unaware that the legal snare he was walking into had been designed specifically to break him. To understand the absolute silence in that locked room, you have to look back at the day the noise stopped for me. 5 years ago, I was the chief financial officer of Sterling Logistics. I was the one who kept the engine running while Marcus gave interviews to business magazines. My downfall began on a Tuesday afternoon when I noticed a persistent, unexplainable liquidity drain in our third quarter projections. I didn't immediately assume malice, I assumed an accounting error. But numbers, unlike people, do not possess the capacity to lie. I spent 3 sleepless nights digging through the encrypted vendor ledgers. What I found were 3 shell companies registered in Delaware, billing us millions for domestic shipping routes that simply did not exist. Every single approval signature on those invoices belonged to Marcus. I did what any responsible CFO would do. I printed the ledgers, placed them in a red folder, and walked into Marcus's office, locking the door behind me. I expected panic. I expected a breakdown or a desperate plea for help. Instead, Marcus leaned back in his chair, steepled his fingers, and looked at me with an expression of mild amusement. "You always work too hard, Evelyn," he had said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "You're seeing ghosts. The stress of this job is clearly affecting your judgment." He didn't just fire me. That would have left me with too much credibility. Instead, Marcus and David Vance spent the next 48 hours engineering an alternate reality. They manufactured a series of backdated emails and manipulated risk assessment reports, creating a perfect, devastating narrative. Evelyn Sterling had made unauthorized, reckless investments in volatile overseas markets, causing a massive financial hemorrhage. They ambushed me at the next board meeting. I walked in expecting to present my findings against Marcus. Instead, David Vance handed out thick binders detailing my gross negligence. The board members, men and women I had worked alongside for a decade, refused to make eye contact with me. Marcus sat at the head of the table, playing the role of the deeply disappointed older brother, telling the room that he was forced to terminate me to save the family legacy. "We won't press charges, Evelyn. Marcus had said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "For the sake of our parents' memory. But you have an hour to clear your desk. If you ever speak of this company's internal finances again, David will bury you in litigation until you can't afford rent." I left the building that day holding a single cardboard box, accompanied by 2 security guards who treated me like a criminal. I didn't scream. I didn't beg the board to believe me. I knew that screaming in a room full of people paid to be death is a waste of oxygen. I simply walked out into the cold Chicago wind, carrying the absolute certainty that I would return. Not with arguments, not with pleas for justice, but with leverage. For 5 years, I worked in the shadows of the financial sector. I built a career in private equity, specializing in hostile takeovers and distressed asset acquisition. I watched from afar as Marcus slowly drove our father's legacy into the ground, driven by his own insatiable greed and operational incompetence. I waited patiently for the bleeding to become critical, and when Marcus finally put out a discreet, desperate call for a private buyout to save himself, I was the one who answered. Under a maze of corporate entities and proxy representatives, Vanguard Holdings made an offer he couldn't refuse. Which brought us back to the 42nd floor. The clock on the wall struck 10. The time for the official signing had arrived. Marcus looked toward the locked glass doors, expecting the senior partner of Vanguard Holdings to walk through them. He expected an old man in a gray suit. He expected a quick handshake and a wire transfer. The security guard, a man I had quietly put on my own payroll 6 months prior, stood aside. I stepped out from the adjoining executive suite, where I had been waiting in silence for the past hour. I wasn't carrying a cardboard box this time. I was carrying a sleek, titanium briefcase containing the unredacted federal audit of Sterling Logistics. I wore a tailored navy suit, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Every single head in the boardroom turned toward the sound. David Vance dropped his pen. It clattered loudly against the table. Marcus stared at me, his arrogant smile freezing, then slowly disintegrating as his brain struggled to process the impossibility of my presence. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure melting under harsh lights. "Evelyn," Marcus choked out, his voice entirely devoid of its usual authority. "What are you doing here? Security! Why is she in the building?" I walked slowly to the opposite end of the mahogany table, placing my briefcase down with a heavy, deliberate thud. I looked directly into his panicked eyes, feeling the exact moment the power dynamic in the room permanently shifted. "I'm here to close the deal, Marcus," I said, my voice echoing in the dead silent room. "You wanted to meet the CEO of Vanguard Holdings. Please, take a seat. We have a lot of numbers to discuss." For a few long, agonizing seconds, the only sound in the boardroom was the hum of the central air conditioning. Marcus stared at me, his mouth slightly open, waiting for someone to explain the joke. When nobody laughed, his shock rapidly metastasized into anger. He slammed his hand flat against the mahogany table, the loud smack echoing sharply off the glass walls. "This is incredibly inappropriate," Marcus snapped, desperately trying to summon the booming, authoritative voice he used to intimidate subordinates. He pointed a trembling finger at the security guard standing by the locked doors. "Frank, remove her from this building immediately. I am the chief executive officer, and I am ordering you to escort this trespasser off the premises." Frank, a man who had worked the lobby desk for 20 years, didn't even blink. He simply crossed his arms and looked straight ahead. "My current employer instructed me to secure the room, Mr. Sterling, and my current employer is Vanguard Holdings." David Vance, the chief legal counsel, stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He tried to project the menacing aura of a high-powered corporate lawyer, but I could see the subtle shake in his hands. "Evelyn, whatever stunt you think you are pulling, it ends right now. You are interfering with a multi-million-dollar acquisition. If you do not leave, I will personally see to it that you are charged with corporate espionage, trespassing, and tortious interference." I didn't argue with David. Arguments are for people who need to convince a room. I only needed to inform them. I pressed my thumbs against the dual latches of my titanium briefcase. The metallic click-clack was deafening in the quiet room. I opened the lid and pulled out a stack of 8 thick, heavily bound documents, the covers bearing the unmistakable seal of an independent, federally licensed forensic auditing firm. I didn't hand the first copy to Marcus. I slid it down the table to Arthur Pendleton, the oldest and most conservative member of the board, a man whose entire reputation was built on risk aversion. "Page 42, Arthur," I said, my voice completely flat, devoid of any theatrical emotion. "I suggest you read the highlighted sections carefully." Arthur adjusted his reading glasses, his hands moving hesitantly. He opened the heavy document. As his eyes tracked across the page, the color drained from his face at an alarming rate. He looked up at Marcus, his expression morphing from confusion to absolute horror. "Marcus," Arthur whispered, his voice cracking, "what is the Crescent Logistics Group? Why are there authorized wire transfers totaling $15 million to an offshore entity that doesn't hold a single physical shipping asset?" Marcus swallowed hard. Sweat began to bead along his hairline. "Arthur, don't listen to her. Those are fabricated documents. She's a disgruntled ex-employee trying to sabotage us out of petty revenge. Vanguard Holdings didn't just make an offer for your shares, Marcus," I interrupted, cutting through his lies with surgical precision. "We acquired your commercial debt 3 weeks ago. When you quietly defaulted on the loan covenants last month, you triggered a hostile restructuring clause. The contract sitting on the table isn't a lucrative cash buyout. It's a formal surrender of your equity to the primary creditor. We don't just own the debt. As of this morning, Vanguard owns the building you are sitting in. We own the chairs you are sitting on. And as the absolute majority stakeholder, Vanguard ordered a comprehensive forensic audit." I pulled a single sheet of paper from my briefcase and laid it gently on the center of the table. It was a bank statement, blown up and printed in high resolution. "You were clever, Marcus," I continued, pacing slowly behind the empty chairs. "You used ghost vendors. You layered the transactions through 3 different international borders, and you used the company's operational budget to cover the interest payments. But you made one fatal, arrogant mistake. You used the exact same digital routing number for the fake vendors that you used to pay the property taxes on your new $12 million estate in Aspen." The remaining board members began flipping frantically through their copies of the audit. Panic, pure and unfiltered, swept through the room like a virus. They realized instantly that if they had voted to approve Marcus's acquisition deal today, they would have been legally complicit in covering up massive federal wire fraud. David Vance realized it too. The survival instinct of a cornered lawyer kicked in. He stepped away from Marcus, physically putting distance between them. "I had no knowledge of these specific transactions," David said loudly, addressing the board rather than me. "The CEO provided the legal department with audited summaries. If there was a misrepresentation of funds, it falls entirely on the executive office. I advised the board to immediately suspend Marcus Sterling." I stopped pacing and looked at David. A cold, genuine smile touched my lips for the first time in 5 years. "Don't try to abandon the sinking ship now, David. You're chained to the anchor," I said. I pulled a second folder from the briefcase, this one bright red. I tossed it onto the table. It slid perfectly to a stop right in front of his hands. "5 years ago, you authored the fake risk assessment reports that framed me. You used a secure server to backdate the emails, assuming the IT logs would be permanently purged after 30 days. David froze, staring at the red folder like it was a venomous snake. "I took a hard drive copy of the server logs the night before you fired me," I told him, watching the realization crush the last bit of fight out of him. "I didn't use it back then because it was your word against mine, and you owned the board. But yesterday, I formally submitted those unredacted logs to the State Bar Association, along with a sworn affidavit. You aren't just going to lose your job, David. You are going to lose your license to practice law right before you are indicted for conspiracy to commit fraud." David Vance collapsed back into his chair, dropping his face into his hands. He didn't say another word. The architect of my exile was completely, utterly broken. Marcus looked around the room. He saw Arthur staring at him with disgust. He saw David defeated. He saw the locked glass doors. The invincible CEO was suddenly just a terrified man in an expensive suit, trapped in a cage he had built himself. He looked at me, his eyes wide, pleading in a way I had never seen before. "Evelyn, please," he whispered, his voice trembling so badly he could barely form the words. "We are family. Mom and Dad wouldn't want this. We can fix it. I'll step down. You can be CEO. Just keep this internal, please." I stood perfectly still, letting the silence stretch, letting him feel the full, crushing weight of the corner he was backed into. I thought about the cardboard box. I thought about the 2 security guards escorting me out into the cold wind while he smiled. "We stopped being family 5 years ago, Marcus," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the finality of a judge's gavel. "You didn't just take my job. You tried to take my sanity. You tried to make me believe I was incompetent so you could steal comfortably." Before Marcus could respond, the heavy glass doors of the boardroom finally unlocked with a sharp electronic beep. Frank, the security guard, pulled them open. 4 men in dark windbreakers walked into the room. The yellow letters FBI were printed clearly across their backs. They were accompanied by 2 agents from the Securities and Exchange Commission. "Marcus Sterling," the lead agent said, his voice flat and authoritative. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes." Marcus didn't fight. He didn't yell. The arrogance had been entirely drained out of him. As the federal agent pulled his hands behind his back, the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked sharply, a sound that seemed to echo louder than anything else in the room. They let him out, David Vance shuffling right behind him, flanked by 2 more agents. The board members sat in stunned silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I walked over to the head of the table, picking up the heavy gold Montblanc pen Marcus had dropped. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows. The Chicago fog was finally beginning to lift, revealing the sharp, clear lines of the city below. Justice isn't always loud. It isn't always a screaming match or a dramatic confrontation. Sometimes, the loudest, most devastating answer to cruelty is the absolute silence of a well-documented truth, waiting patiently in the shadows until the perfect moment to step into the light.